Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Tabisa Maisela from the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching in the Academic Staff Development Cluster. And today I'm here with our two Distinguished Teacher Award recipients, Professor Andrew Agent and Dr. Tessa Downs. So I've just, because they were the recipients, and so I've just taken some stuff that was available on the site. I will then also ask them to introduce themselves. So Professor Agent is widely regarded as a world expert in pediatric critical care. He works with clinicians and has invented quite a lot of, he's invested quite a lot of time in training students to become trainers themselves. His curriculum innovations include introducing advanced courses in critical care and life support to South Africa and developing the simulations laboratory based at the Red Cross Children's Hospital. He is described as making every interaction a learning experience and challenging the boundaries and hierarchies of the health professions by adopting a multidisciplinary approach to training, including nurses and the allied health professionals with his teaching of registers. His teaching is well known and he's someone with passion. And so the committee was really impressed by his work in terms of care, humility, respect, and generosity, as well as his ability to transform the way that his students perceive the pediatric patient beyond the health conditions they present. And then we also have got Dr. Dowling, who is constantly described as an exceptional teacher who takes a student-centered approach and demonstrates an awareness of the why and how of her teaching. So she's really working with students, and she really positions herself as a language researcher who eagerly welcomes student contributions and participation and empowers students to deepen their mastery of the language. She's engaged in just quite creative ways of creating a learning space that is compassionate and collaborative. She demonstrates openness and a desire for students to succeed. This also involves different teaching methodologies and activities, and she also really gets her students immersed in isiXhosa communities. So there is so much that she does in her classroom, and also really making sure that students have an authentic learning experience. So I'll hand over to them to also introduce themselves.
Do you want to start?
You start.
Okay. So thanks for that very kind introduction. I mean, the context that I've worked most of my life has been in pediatric, that's care of sick children, and particularly the care of very sick children or the critically ill. And the students have ranged from undergraduate medical students who just starting out in their career probably has spent most of the time with registrars and post-specialization trainees. And those are people who've decided they love doing pediatrics, have made this their career, and are now specializing in that field. And I think the other aspect of my work is that I've always been a clinician, and most of my teaching has happened in the context of the bedside with real patients there, with real environments, and with students who who feel in themselves a real need to get to grips with this so they can carry out their responsibilities. But what it does mean is that I've got a responsibility to the student, but I've got a responsibility to the patient who's there as well, and to make sure that the student knows how to look after the patient safely and understand what's going on there. And that also carries through from the teaching process to the assessment process. Because if we sign off someone as being a competent pediatrician, that means that they're now licensed to look after your sick child. And I have to know that they're competent to do that. So that's something of the background of where it's been. So it's been always with very highly motivated students, with people who've got real issues to deal with, and in the context of children and their families. So I don't know if that gives some setting.
Yes, yes.
Well, Andrew, I wish I had initially students that motivated.
Yes.
But I absolutely hear you that the context is everything, because you will get a bunch of students in a particular context, and you will understand that half the class speak Xhosa, half the class speak Zulu, you know, or there's a quarter of them who speak Sotho or Tswana, and they're coming and they don't know why. And then, you know, of course, English speakers, who, as we know in South Africa, are completely monolingual. Sorry to you. But, and then you get them all together and you're in this context and you think, what do you need the language for? So part of my pedagogy is to understand what are your needs? What do you need this for? And of course, I have in my mind what I need to teach, but I also want to know what they need the language for. And so I try, you know, to find out what they need it for. And it could be in a hospital setting that they need it for that. They need to be able to comfort somebody in their own language. So we have all those different needs. We have a syllabus pushing, you know, like that I have to get through. And we also have sometimes attitudes, which is, I don't even know why I'm doing this. Like, you know, it's a sort of, I thought it wasn't, I asked people, like, you know, why are you doing Xhosa? And I was like, because it's Xhosa silula, man. It's easy. And then you think, okay, I've got some people who think it's easy. That's why they're doing it. I've got some people who they want to speak it. And then you get others who want the grammar of the language, and you get others who want to teach it as a second language. So in one class, you have all of these different needs. And so it's in the context, and you have to try and think, how am I going to bring them all together? How am I going to motivate those who are not that motivated? And part of the thing, I think, and I'm sure this happens with you, Andrew, as well, is that you've got to create a sense of trust in the class and a sense of family, really, is that we're in this together. If we're going to succeed and we're all going to learn what we need to learn, then we're going to pull together. We're going to have our chores that we have to do, but we are going to also support each other in our various endeavors. And I think that's really important.
I mean, that just seems so interesting to me, because, I mean, part of teaching effectively, I think, is you need to understand what people don't know.
Yes.
And in order to discover what they don't know, they've got to be prepared to be vulnerable enough to let you find that out. Now, they're not going to do that if they don't feel safe in your environment.
But Andrew, the easiest way to do that is to say, I don't know. It's the first time I've heard that word. You know, but you'll in a sense, I think a teacher humility, you know, if it is student-centered, but also keeping your authority that you do know stuff, but also humbling yourself. And I have to, as like a white lecturer who only started learning Xhosa when she was 24, you know, teaching it, you've got to say there's going to be so much that I don't know, so much cultural capital that I don't have, but there's stuff I know, and I also know how to think about things, which I could help you. Not that you don't know how to think about things, but some critical thinking that we can bring in. But yeah, that humility to say, I don't know, and to let the students know that it's okay to say you don't know, and to say, but let me find out. How do I find out? And so it's wonderful when I get students saying, so I think I better get some dictionaries. And have you got some websites? Are there some movies I can watch? What is the radio station I can listen to? And I don't even push them there, and they're just going of their own accord.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
And so how do you, maybe just firstly, what sparked your interest in going for it?
Well, spark my interest was, I dropped out of university after my first few months, thinking I can't do history, I can't do this, I'm just too useless. Just sense of like, I can't, and also I didn't have the money. And so I went and studied, and as I studied through UNISA and became the worst Kelly girl that ever hit Cape Town's shores. I was so bad, but within the working as a secretary, I realized one of the things that they always wanted me back was that you had a sense of humor, that you had a sense of energy, and that you had a sense of curiosity about this job that you knew absolutely nothing about, that you would learn. And I thought, well, I'm curious about African languages. I've heard them my whole life, and yet I've never had the chance to study them. So I thought, I'm going to go back to university. I'm going to save up, and then I'm going to go back. And I went to the African language department, and I remember this one saying, yo, Nangumlungu. Here's a white so who wants to learn Xhosa. And it was really lovely the way I was accepted by my professors, Professor Chapoli, that they were great. Also white professors, it was a mixed, and the sense of we're in the new South Africa there, where we're all just excited about learning African languages. And then realizing that the field, there had been so little research, and it had been so missionary dominated and so, confined to a kind of colonial discourses, that there was so much that we could do and bring it into, modern ways of looking at language. And I was terrible for years and years and years until somebody said, is lalini. So I went to go and live in the villages, where again you're completely humbled because everybody speaks such beautiful Xhosa. They have such wonderful knowledge, and so that humbled me, but also inspired me to become more fluent. I'm still not, but just to learn more and more every day. And I think every day that I encounter Xhosa, I think there's more we could do. Oh, nobody's researched that, or there's that to do. So I'm really excited about the language as well.
Okay, thank you. So if I may ask Andrew, what's your teaching philosophy? I understand, as you've described your teaching context at the moment, it's sort of really trying to get people into this community. So you've got these students who are coming sort of as the novice, and so you are trying to get them into this community of practice. So what would you say your teaching philosophy is, and how do you try to really get them motivated into this discipline?
Look, I think there are a whole number of things. One is I find the discipline of pediatrics, and particularly that related to pediatric critical care, absolutely fascinating. I mean, there are just so many facets to it, so many things that are exciting. And I mean, people often say to you, it must be difficult working with sick children. And you say, yes, it is. And when things don't work out the way we want them to, it's incredibly sad. But when we get it right, it's this unbelievable sense of satisfaction that, you've got someone better and you can offer them so much. So there's a sense of excitement about it. And I mean, it's extraordinary because if you're in clinical work, it doesn't matter how long you've been in the game, every single day there's something new that pops up. You go, wow. So there's that sense of excitement. And then what's so fascinating is that people come, they're sort of interested, but as they learn, it's like their eyes open. They start to see things, start to understand things. They start to be able to do things, be able to develop skills. So it's really exciting to try and say, how do we create a structure, a way of thinking, an approach that enables people to pull all this stuff together, to integrate and say, okay, that's how it works. So those are some of the background of what I get excited about.
Yes. Thank you.
It's also just what you were saying about going into something and going, but so why is it like this? And that's something that I'm really excited about. And it can also challenge some of my assumptions, because when I'm asking, why is it like this? Then I start to think, well, actually, why? And it's in the syllabus there that I should ask them why. But then I'm starting to think, but just recently, an article I read, and I think that's another thing. One should keep up with the literature as a lecturer. You should keep up with journal articles and talking to people and anything that can inform your discipline. But one of the assumptions that I came in with, was that everybody would be excited with a new way people are speaking. People are using so much English, and this was so great. And then one of my students put up their hand and said, I want the standard. I want standardist class. I don't want all this, your emotivation yam and everything like that, I want the closer word for it. And then I realized that my assumption was that we should study language as a dynamic, phenomenon, also needed to be tempered. And so I could build that into the syllabus, which is we're looking at language as dynamic, but we're also looking at the need for a standard. And why do we need a standard? So why do we need a standard? But why do we need not to neglect language as it is spoken? Because if we are going to use the Xhosa months of the year, which are beautiful, I have to tell them there were English months of the year, which we no longer use in Old English, like maybe the month of the three milkings or whatever. We don't use that anymore. And so when language is dynamic, it moves, it borrows. And quite a lot of my students said that they didn't realize, that 70% of English vocabulary is actually French. And then we look at, historical influences, and we can put it in a huge, movement of language, and not sort of ghettoize, our little space. So what you're saying, the where, the how is just great, but also having that structure that the student knows when I get to class, this is what I'm definitely going to cover. And this is probably where she's going to set us an assignment to, especially in the honors classes and the postgraduate classes, where we can really go off onto these kind of multidisciplinary ways of looking at language.
I mean, I find that really intriguing what you're saying. I mean, one of the dynamics of medicine and healthcare is that knowledge changes.
Yes.
In fact, one of the standard things that used to be told to first year students was that over the next few years, we will teach you a lot. At least 50% of it is wrong. And unfortunately, we don't know which it is now.
Yes.
And so what's happening is all the time you're realizing, oops, we need to upgrade that.
Exactly.
We need to think about it differently. We need to adapt things. And so you've got to be staying in touch with it. But also giving students a sense that, well, you have to be open to things might change, that it's fair and reasonable to ask questions, and it should be fun to do that.
And that being open, to me, that is so critical to being a good teacher.
Yeah. And I think really also in both your cases, that really needs to be there. Because I'm just thinking, for instance, in terms of Andrew, you've got your, you're working with patients, your students are there, and every day in these wards, you've got different cases, and you're helping your students to understand these different illnesses that their patients would be coming in with. And sometimes it may be hard to even find maybe some of the stuff that you would have liked to teach your students. So how would you go about that?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the costs of teaching at the bedside is that you teach what's in front of you, and that's exciting in its own right. But in fairness to the student, you've then got to bear in mind that they need to see the full spectrum, and they need to be exposed to situations that might not happen that frequently. I mean, one of those examples is, resuscitation. So I can't lay on the patient who collapses in front of you, and I wouldn't want to. But it does mean that then we start getting into the game of simulation and starting to say, okay, well, I haven't got that exact thing. We can maybe have some recorded video material that we could talk through. But we could also get models, mock-up situations, create scenarios, and then take them through it as if that was real life. And, some of the models that we use can be very simple, but these days you can get models that will cry for you, that will breathe, that will have cardiac arrhythmias. So there are other ways, other than just being at the bedside, to take people into situations. But that's also so exciting because, for instance, if you need to teach someone how to have a difficult conversation with a family, to impart bad news, I can't take students into that context because those are private spaces. But there's nothing to stop us acting it out, sitting down, simulate it, have the conversation, think of the words that we need to use, and maybe the words that we shouldn't use in those settings. And you know what, one of the things about simulation is that it enables people to try out different approaches and try doing things in different ways without there being a consequence. But it enables them to increase their repertoire. So I think the whole area of simulation is a really exciting way of teaching particular skills or opening conversations about things. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, that resonates with me, because we would also need to simulate. We would also need to create little dialogues in the classroom, the kind of dialogues that I would imagine that they would need outside, whether it's in a hospital or doing field work or just with friends or with a lover even. I mean, I've done that. So it's just thinking about and going and reflecting what are their preoccupations. In my case, I can think, what would you like? And what are you thinking about? And then we can go there, whether it's music or, you know, flirtation strategies. I can go there and we can create dialogue. So mine probably not nearly as, you know, heavy as yours, but at the same time important to simulate, because otherwise it's cold and unrelated to reality.
Thank you. So we've got 2 questions from the audience. The first one asks, what words of wisdom can you offer junior colleagues just starting out on the teaching journey? Let's go.
I think you said it earlier. I mean, one is be humble and be realistic about what you know and what you don't know. And you know what, when you start out your career, there's not much age difference between you and the students, to be honest. So, you know, certainly when you've been doing the thing for 30 or 40 years, you expect it to have accumulated a whole lot. But so I think be humble, accept what you know and what you don't know. But I think be excited about the topics that are there. And again, one of those things about, if you're not sure, there's this wonderful opportunity to say, okay, let's now explore how we can jointly find that knowledge. Let's look it up. Let's go through that. Let's go to the sources. Let's see if the sources are believable. Let's make sure that we can work through that together. And so I don't think the teacher has to be the one that kind of imparts the wisdom. It's a joint process that actually we're in this game together. Perhaps I know a little bit more about it than you do, but you know what? We need to learn this together, and it's much more fun if we do that way.
Absolutely. I mean, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that part of that humility and everything, I'm afraid to say to any of those of you who are starting out as young lecturers, is a whole lot of hard work. I mean, a lot of it is when you're thinking, somebody asked this question in class today, I said I'd get back to you, but then I've got to go and just do it. Do that hard work, because next year you won't have to do it. And it'll just excite the class that you found out that thing, that you got back to them on Amatuba or Vula or whatever platform immediately. And as Andrew says, that sense of excitement, not that, oh, why did you ask me that question? Wow, that's interesting. I'll get down to it. I'll get back to you. I think that excitement, that hard work, and that curiosity.
So allowing that moment of vulnerability. So it's not like
allowing it.
Always being the expert. I should be knowing all.
And then also as a young lecturer, to be interested in your students as people, to remember that this one actually plays the trumpet, and that this, if you've got a small class, because I know when I've done that, they're like, how do you know that about me? The next day you get like somebody sitting in the front row staring at you, know me more. So there is that sense of like, be interested in your students, be interested in the knowledge, and interested in how they learn. Because you can say, I know you go to the taverns and you go and it's fine. No, don't do too much, but tell us what you learned there. I know you like to go to the library. tell us what you learned there. So get
Mm.
to know their personalities and their learning styles as well, and endorse them if they're not going to get them into too much trouble.
Mm.
And also just be yourself. I think that's the other thing. Don't be fake. Don't act like the big professor or doctor or whatever. I think it's, yeah, I wouldn't do that. I would just go in and be yourself. They really appreciate that.
Mm.
I say, I mean, as part of that, over the years, we've run various courses. There's the Advanced Pediatric Life Support course and so on. And part of those courses is training instructors. And one of the joys to me is seeing instructors who are competent in their skills, but who all come with their own individual personality, way of doing things. It's so much more interesting. It's so much more real. And it gives a whole reality to interactions between students, between teachers and staff. And it's, again, it's much more fun doing it that way.
Thank you.
I think maybe the other thing is what that also does is it encourages the students to be themselves, to be real and not feel that they have to project some image. That's who they are. That's what they're interested in. That's what their fascination is. And to encourage that development.
Yes. So it's not just only about the skill or the knowledge, also the self.
The self.
Developed. Okay, so we also got a second question, which is, what do you wish you would have done differently?
Like
now
everything.
that you
I think there's just so much. I mean, there's so much. I wish I had started, you know, researching language and language varieties and dialects at a much earlier age. I wish I had read more. I wish I had done linguistics, you know, formally. I wish I had learned Swahili. You know, it's mostly about knowledge. You wish that, you know, instead of lying on the beach drinking a cocktail or taking a photograph, or not that I did then in my day, but all the stupid things one did and all that self-hatred and stuff that went on when one was young, instead of just saying, well, how will I feel better? And that'll be to know more so that I can bring that to the class. So I think I wish I had done more courses. I wish I had, just got involved with knowledge from a younger age.
But I guess it's never enough, because each year you've got different set of students with different needs and expectations.
Yes, and so you maybe, I should learn that.
Yes, and everything is just evolving. There's a lot happening language-wise, social media, and so on.
Yeah,
so
there's so much going on.
Really,
but Andrew, do you?
No, I think strangely enough, for me, one of the things is I wish I'd developed more skill in languages. And part of that is, it just seems to me that you can't really understand people until you understand something of their language. You know, people have a way of saying something, and that reflects deeply who they are. So I think if I'd been able to learn more languages, that would have been awesome. And I've always, when I've been able to speak people's language, one is you get a much better connection with them because they feel you can communicate. But it also just brings such a lot of understanding of those communities and who they are. So for me, that would be a regret, but there we are.
But I'm aware at least now that there are some of those courses in health sciences. Because really working with people coming from the different communities, so at least the 3 languages used in the Western Cape.
Yes.
I look, you know, there's been more and more emphasis on it. I mean, the other thing that is fascinating is that over the years, I've ended up working in a variety of contexts across the country where we've had interpreters. And it's always this fascinating thing. And there's certain conversations you end up having again and again, and you end up saying to the interpreter, no, that's not what she said.
Because I've heard it so often.
But yeah, it clearly makes a huge difference if you can speak people's own languages and understand just the roots of who they are and where they come from. So
You can imagine, really, because
Absolutely.
she's always the patient looking at the interpreter
yeah.
to sort of, get things across. So in your teaching spaces, how do you have any examples of other activities or what you actually bring to the space in terms of just thinking about how you make your learning more inclusive? Any examples that you could give us?
Well,
It's,
I mean, one of the things that I've tried quite often with small groups of students is, particularly if we've been able to have the child as part of that discussion, and sometimes if the mother's there, if the child is too young to be part of that discussion, it's always been amazing if you can actually get the mother to be the one who's actually sharing and providing the information and help us understand what her needs are and what it is that she's actually asking. And again, if one's able to ask the students then to start, one of the questions I sometimes like to put to people is, if you were in her position, what would you want to know? What would your questions be? Because that helps you to think through, what do I need to actually address here? What are actually the priorities? So that's one example.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to ask students to give me their own histories, give me the narratives of their lives, especially if they're Xhosa speaking. Tell me about your life, where you grew up. And you who are English speaking in the class, maybe you've had 10 years at school, maybe you've had 2 years, because that's the kind of thing that I have in my classes, all these different levels. Let's go, some of us will interpret while the speaker is speaking. So including that learner as, and how did you get your love of language, or how did you learn your Xhosa? Oh, and they will tell you that, their grandmother used to tell them stories, and that the stories that they told them, or how their grandfather, actually spoke a lot of Sotho, and how he used the Sotho with them. And then we try and look at how Sotho is related to Xhosa. We don't just say, oh, well, Sotho, it's not in this class. We'll be inclusive, because all these languages are connected. If you do Xhosa, you'll easily be able to do Sotho, you'll have the same language structure. So just trying to make the class an area, a small South Africa, where we know that we've got all these different nations and speakers, and then saying to the English speaker who's now maybe feeling outside, and what was your language history? Then you'll find that the grandmother actually speaks Irish or something strange, or Welsh, and somebody else speaks German and the other one speaks French. And did you learn any of that, and how did you learn it? And so you bring their own language profiles into the class and what they learned. And then other people in the class say, yes, that's French. You know French. That's how you must teach me. Just let me take your number. I'll get a free French lesson from you. And then they WhatsApp each other and whatever. And it becomes like a language sharing class. So I feel that we are inclusive in that way too.
Yes, and really embracing all these different cultures and languages that you have in the classroom. Okay.
Definitely.
Anything you'd like to just maybe end off with?
For me, it's sad that only 0.0000001% of English-speaking South Africans, English and Afrikaans-speaking South Africans, Afrikaans speakers are better at learning African languages, learn an African language up to third year level. So, and as for postgraduate, it just peters out entirely. And I would like to encourage everybody out there who's thinking of doing a beginner's course, just to maybe think of doing an African language. We teach Sotho and Xhosa in our department. And I think that kind of learning experience will be with you. It's a skill. And I think like yours, Andrew, it's a skill that you will never, ever lose. If you come to class and you are excited by the materials and learn, you will have it for life. And so that's something I would like to say to all the students out there is do it.
I think almost complementing that is the sense of, don't get too stuck in your discipline, because, I think one of the huge opportunities of universities or places of learning is that you get to interact with multidisciplinary people from all sorts of interests and so on. And it's so exciting to learn from the arts people, to learn from the science people, to get a sense of how people in different spheres think about things, do things. And, you know, it's also exciting to discover that, you know, there's something the engineers did. Wow, I can use that. and that helps to explain. And so people, it's so useful to build this multidisciplinarity. And I mean, particularly in health services where we end up having to work with large multidisciplinary teams. You know, the days of the doctor who just did the thing on their own are long since gone. You now have to work with this team of people with their own specific disciplines and skills, but somehow you've got to work together. And so knowing how they interact and so on, to me, that's incredibly useful. And it just makes it much more fun as well.
Yes, yes. And I think also it allows the student more opportunities to tap into different disciplines as well.
And to find their niches and to
yes, and not just being bogged down by structures. Okay. So I think this brings us to the end. Thank you so much for
thank you.
Thank you.